Allora, buongiorno a tutti, agli ospiti e ai colleghi che sono in linea. Innanzitutto auguri di buona Pasqua e porgo soprattutto i saluti al presidente Robert J. Baserra, ai relatori e a tutti i colleghi che sono connessi al webinar, sia da Roma che dalla Florida. Vi do il benvenuto in questa conferenza che siamo riusciti a realizzare grazie alla proficua collaborazione tra la Florida Bar International Law Section e il nostro Ordine degli Avvocati di Roma. La cooperazione ha avuto inizio a dicembre 2018, data in cui abbiamo siglato un accordo di cooperazione fra le istituzioni. Lo scopo di questo accordo è stato quello di offrire a entrambi gli ordini una piattaforma formativa di carattere istituzionale e a titolo gratuito, quindi accessibile a tutti, funzionale per acquisire una reciproca più approfondita conoscenza dei rispettivi sistemi giuridici e giudiziari per una ottica professionale di crescita. Ringrazio in particolare la Commissione di Diritto Europeo e Internazionale dell'Ordine degli Avvocati, sulla quale stiamo investendo davvero tante energie, e i consiglieri responsabili, e in particolare il collega Luca Bagnasco, che con il suo lavoro ci ha consentito di raggiungere questo importante traguardo. L'incontro oggi approfondirà il tema delle transazioni immobiliari in Florida, in Italia, con l'obiettivo di cercare di offrire ai professionisti un quadro della normativa di riferimento dei rispettivi ordinamenti. Sono certo che avremo tante altre opportunità di approfondimento nei nostri sistemi giuridici e che la cooperazione fra i nostri ordini si intensificherà col tempo. Quindi spero che avremo occasione di incontrarci presto, spero di potervi ospitare a Roma in presenza e non soltanto in videoconferenza, e vi ringrazio per l'attenzione e vi auguro una utile e fruttuosa riunione di approfondimento. Adesso, a beneficio dei colleghi americani, cercherò di dire gli stessi concetti nella loro lingua. Allora, good morning. First of all, I would like to extend my greetings to the President Robert J. Baserra, to the speakers, and to all the colleagues connected to this webinar from Rome and Florida. Welcome to this conference, which has been possible thanks to the fruitful collaboration between the Florida Bar International Law Section and the Roma Bar Association. Our collaboration between our two institutions, the aim of this agreement is to offer to the members of both orders an institutional and free change training platform in order to acquire a reciprocal and more in-depth knowledge to the respective legal and judicial systems to foster professional growth. In this regard, I would like to thank the European and International Law Commission of the Roma Bar Association, the responsible councillors, and in particular my colleague Luca Bagnasco, whose work has made it possible to archive this important milestone. Today's meeting will explore the interesting topic of real estate transaction in Florida and Italy, precisely with the aim of trying to offer the professionals a view of frameworks governing the relevant legislation in the two legal systems. I am sure that many other opportunities to deep dive our legal system will follow, and that the cooperation between our orders will intensify more and more. I hope we will soon have changes to meet in person and host you again in Rome. I thank you for your attention, and I wish you an enriching conference.
I'd like to say a few words. I am Robert Becerra, the chair of the Florida Bar International Law Section, and I would like to thank the Rome Bar and the remarks that were just made in regards to this great program and series of webinars that our two institutions are going to be presenting for the benefit of both our members. Just for those who are not that familiar with the international law section of the Florida Bar, our section is a forum for the exchange of important need-to-know information of international law in Florida and in practice between Florida and other countries. Our section was founded back in 1981 and provides an organization for our members who have an interest in international law and international practice. It's a forum for sharing knowledge like what we're doing today, and to improve best practices between lawyers of different countries, and to improve the administration of application of rules and statutes, and most importantly, to enforce the rule of law and how important the rule of law is in international law and international practice. In furtherance of that, our two organizations have a collaboration agreement. And in that collaboration agreement, of which we take very seriously, it provides that we're to build a special relationship between the International Law Section and the Rome Bar to enable members of both of our bars to enjoy arrangements for becoming acquainted with the ever more complex and varied legal relationships arising through the economic, cultural, and legal bonds between Florida and Italy, to improve the services provided for legal service users between Florida and Italy. And one of the things that we're doing, of course, today in collaboration with the Rome Bar is this program today. Also, our agreement provides to facilitate relationships between our two bars. I invite members of the Rome Bar to be involved in our activities, just as we would like to be active in your activities as well. We have a number of activities during the year in our section that we invite members of the Rome Bar to consider participating in. For instance, we have an arbitration competition provided for law schools. Some law schools from Europe always have been able to participate as well, especially lately since it's been done through things like Zoom and other virtual platforms. We have an annual conference that normally would be in February. We didn't have it this year due to COVID, but normally we would have an annual international law conference in February that we also would ask or allow Rome Bar participants to enjoy and network with us at. We have also a lunch and learn series where we have guests that are prominent international practitioners in Florida, and you can learn about some of the practitioners here as we would like to learn about the practitioners in Rome. And we have other programs as well, and we can certainly actually send you our weekly newsletter if you would be interested, and we certainly can do that. One of the things I'd like to do today is thank our members who have been involved in organizing and participating in this webinar. Fabio Jalanza, for instance, who was our delegate to the Rome Bar and actually signed our collaboration agreement. We thank him. Katie Sanoja is the chairman of our continuing legal education committee, and is right there, and she is the one who coordinates our participation in learning activities for lawyers. And our treasurer, Jacqueline Villalba, is one of your panelists today, board-certified, Florida Bar board-certified immigration lawyer. And so we are very excited to begin this series of webinars. We thank you all for attending and participating. And with that, I just wish you all buongiorno and buonasera. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
Thank you. Thank you a lot, President Becerra. So it's my turn. I try to speak a little speech with my poor English. I am very glad to express my very warm welcome to friends and colleagues from Florida Bar, and also to all colleagues of Rome. Pandemic emergency does not allow to meet physically, but this conference is a very, very good opportunity with the technological link and with the opera of Andrea Pontecorvo. We must be very grateful to all of you to do this meeting and this opportunity to improve the capacity of Italian lawyers and in the field of legal matter and of business relation. The whole friendship between United States and Italy, it's a great moment, and as someone said before me, today is a milestone in the progress of relation between these whole two institutions. I don't want to talk about anymore. I want just to say to everybody happy Easter and give immediately the word to Cristina Tamburro, that's a member of the Rome Bar Council. And please, Cristina, explain the career of all speakers in today's meeting. At you.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I also would like to extend my greetings to the President Robert Becerra, which is part of this webinar, to all the speakers and all the colleagues connected to this webinar from Rome and Florida. Welcome to this conference. I'm very glad to be part too of this meeting, which has been possible thanks to this fruitful collaboration between the Florida Bar International Law Section and the Rome Bar Association. Now, about this cooperation between our two institutions, I would like to give the floor to Catherine Sanoia, which is she is the continuing legal education chair for the Florida Bar International Law Section. Thank you for your presence. She will make a presentation of the cooperation agreement between the Florida Bar International Law Section and the Rome Bar Association. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you for that introduction. Good morning to those in the United States. Good afternoon to our friends and colleagues in Rome or anywhere else in Italy that you might be. As Bob had explained, we have an agreement with the Rome Bar, and as part of that agreement, we are developing a series of webinars. Hopefully, this is the first one. Hopefully, we'll have at least 2 more that we will share with you soon. We also expect to be announcing those topics and speakers very soon. In the meantime, we would like to invite all of you to visit our webpage, internationallawsection.org. You will see a list of events that are upcoming. We actually have 2 very interesting events that are upcoming in April. The first is in collaboration with our India subcommittee, and it's the enforcement of arbitral awards in India. We have a very interesting array of cases that will be discussed, as well as speakers, and that will take place on April 8th. We also have one actually moderated by our president, Bob Becerra, on April 22nd, which will be achieving compliance and identifying fraud in personal protective equipment transactions, which everyone knows is a very timely topic with the ongoing pandemic. And again, that will take place April 22nd. And there's more information on our webpage. So I invite all of you to go to our webpage and see we try to offer at least 1 program a month, and many times there's 2 or 3 programs a month. And for those of you from the Florida Bar that are seeking Florida CLE credit, the course number is 4674. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Catherine Sanoia. Now we start with the topic of this afternoon. We know this transnational webinar is a forum on real estate investments. And as we know, Florida has attracted significant Italian investments, and also Italian real estate market presents opportunities on both leisure incoming producing side. So the idea was to help attorneys on both sides to know better how a real estate transaction works in each country. I now I have the honor to present the next speaker, which is Fabio Jalanza, native of Rome. Fabio focuses his practice on cross-border transactions, corporate and real estate. Fabio regularly advises US, international businesses, individual on corporate matters, including financing, mergers and acquisitions. He also regularly assists clients in real estate transactions. He recently completed the LLM program in taxation at the University of Miami. So thank you very much, Fabio. He will speak about inbound real estate transactions in Florida.
Thank you so much, Christina. Hello, everyone. My regards to the colleagues connected from Florida. My regards also to Chair Becerra and Presidente Galletti. Permettetemi un paio di parole in italiano, rivolgendo un saluto ai cari colleghi dell'Ordine di Roma. È sempre un piacere in qualche modo tornare a casa e poter dialogare con i colleghi della mia città natale, quindi un onore e un piacere particolare. Switching back to English, we're going to start our program today with initially an overview of how real estate transactions work in the state of Florida. Particularly, we're going to be concerning ourselves with some of the issues, the intricacies that arise when an international, a foreign buyer intends to invest in the state of Florida. I'm going to share my screen. I prepared a small presentation. And as an overview of what we'll be talking about today, the first segment of my presentation will focus on giving you an outline of really how a Florida real estate transaction works. It is not entirely different from what you're accustomed to see in Italy. However, there are some significant differences that attorneys advising Italian clients that are interested in investing into the Florida market should be aware of. The second part will be devoted to understanding some of the background considerations that go into acquiring real estate in the state of Florida or in the United States when the purchase is made by a foreign investor. In the case of individuals, a particular item of concern is probate, which is the U.S. Succession procedure handled by the courts. Another item that should be of significant concern when advising foreign clients, when I say foreign, I mean non-U.S., is the possible application of the estate tax, and finally the application of something called Ferpta Withholding, which is we'll talk about it in further detail later. It's a form of withholding part of the purchase price at the closing of a real estate transaction. So as far as the timeline goes, same as in Italy, you're going to have initially the sale and purchase agreement, something similar to the contratto preliminare in a way, which is going to dictate everything that is going to happen between the moment the contract is signed and the closing, which is when we say closing, the term would be rogito, which is so the exchange of title and the disbursement of funds. Some of the things that happen during that time are outlined in this list. So if there is financing involved, there will be some time devoted to applying for a loan and going through the underwriting process. So providing the financing institution with whatever information they need in order to approve the loan. There is going to be, in many cases, an application process that is done with either a homeowners or a condominium association. I would say this is extremely relevant for foreign investors, as they do tend, in my experience, to prefer investing in properties that are part of a condominium association, so of an apartment building, in order to basically have to worry less about the maintenance of the property. That entails, though, that before the closing occurs, the homeowners association, the condominium association, will have to approve the transaction, will have to scrutinize and approve the buyer. Something else happens before closing, and that's the title insurance underwriting process. Title insurance, we'll talk about it in further detail, is a way of protecting a buyer from defects that may exist on the chain of title. In other words, issues that may arise with previous owners and liens that may exist on the property that do not appear in an initial title search. So moving on to the sale and purchase agreement, it is in the state of Florida, it tends to be a standard document most of the times, particularly when buying existing properties. So when you're buying from a private individual, from an owner, you'll see that I would say 99%, maybe 100% of cases, the parties will use a contract called FARBAR. This is a standard contract. I purposely included part of the first page in the presentation. It's a standard contract that the parties will simply fill out. It was created and is constantly updated by mutual agreement between the Florida Association of Realtors, so real estate agents and brokers, and the Florida Bar, our organization. And the FARBAR contract provides a framework for a very predictable path to closing. Using the same document at all times ensures that there is a body of law that has developed from the FARBAR contract and in the interpretation of the FARBAR contract, and makes the procedure standard. As I said, predictability is key. We have FARBAR documents for a number of other real estate situations. We do have a standard document for a commercial purchase, so not only for acquiring residential property, but you may be using one of these standard documents to acquire commercial income-producing property. The situation is a little different with the new development. You tend to see a little less standardization. You don't have something like the FARBAR contract. Normally, each developer will present you with their standard form of development contract. And one key difference that I always mention to my clients in a development contract versus your standard FARBAR transaction is the fact that the development contract will not include a financing contingency. What does that mean? It means that you need to get to closing with cash in hand. You need to have a range for a lender to provide that cash at closing. You cannot terminate the contract on the basis of a lender not approving the loan, not approving the transaction. Big difference, and it is key to keep in mind. So digging a little more into the FARBAR contract, I thought that would be in terms of a little bit of a case study, it would be the most relevant situation to examine, just because in practical terms, that's, as an Italian lawyer, chances are that if your client is interested in investing in property, he will be presented at some point with a FAR/BAR contract. And I looked at the residential one. Considerations are more or less similar in the case of commercial property. The contract starts by basically laying out the basics, your parties, the property description. It includes the legal description of the property, so how the contract appears in the county registry. It includes, obviously, the purchase price and the closing details. Usually, you can expect a real estate transaction in Florida to take approximately 45 to 60 days to close. The difference usually lies in whether or not the property is financed. In other words, if the buyer will not be seeking financing for the property, the process through closing is much faster. I've seen transaction close in 45 days. I've actually seen transactions close in 30 days. When a bank is involved, when financing is involved, the process tends to be much longer for reasons that you can obviously understand. The contract continues by talking about financing, and it lays out what I was referring to before. It provides for a standard financing contingency. In other words, if the bank will not approve the issuance of a loan with a loan commitment, the transaction, the buyer will be able to terminate and request his deposit back. Very important to keep in mind when advising a client to keep that financing contingency in check. There's a number of considerations that go into it. You may wanna, and a real estate attorney will advise you on possibly including an appraisal rider to the agreement to make sure that you get an early shot at terminating the agreement if the bank appraisal comes short. In other words, if the property is valued at less than the contract amount. Contract goes on by establishing how the parties are going to split the closing costs. And I would say the most significant of them is title insurance, which I keep repeating, we'll talk about it later. There is a cost allocation table. This is where you may want to address, for example, issues like special assessments. Special assessment is when it's a situation in which a city levies what looks like a tax against a number of properties or a specific property in exchange for an improvement that was created and that benefits that particular property. So it's almost like a tax levied on an individual or semi-individual basis. You're gonna get your chance in this section of the contract to determine how is it going to be allocated. Will the seller have to pay off that special assessment at closing, or will he just have to take care of what is owed up to closing, and then the rest will be for the buyer to pay? There's a number of disclosures. It's just normally things that are required by law. It's just a variety of different matters. Important items just to mention is the HOA disclosures. So the fact that you need to go through that approval process that I was mentioning before. And another important item, I'll give you more information later, is Ferpta, the tax withholding that applies to the sale of a piece of real property by a foreign owner. Contract goes on by setting forth property maintenance obligations and the inspection rights. One thing that is very, very important to mention and to make sure your client understands is the fact that the FAR/BAR contract, and I would say any other real estate contract in Florida, will normally provide for a purchase on an as-is basis. In other words, you're acquiring the property in the physical and legal status which it is the moment you sign the contract. There's no obligation on the side of the seller to provide you, to make improvements to the property, to repair anything, unless you specifically establish that in the contract. You may want to be careful with repair obligations for the seller. I tend to advise my clients to always get a credit. So to put a dollar value to whatever item it is that they want to get repaired, to discount it from the purchase price, and then take care of that repair later. You don't want to find yourself stuck arguing, with all parties involved in the real estate transaction, waiting to close just because someone didn't fix the AC unit. You really don't want to find yourself in that situation. Take care of closing, put a dollar amount, and take care of the repairs at a later time, post-closing. There is an obligation, though, to maintain the property in the current status. So you're acquiring, as I said, as is, as of the date you're signing the contract. So from the date you sign the contract, the property needs to remain exactly the same, in the same status on the day you close. You have a right to inspect the property it's usually between 10 to 15 days. And during such time, you can cancel the contract with no questions asked. You don't need to give any reason. I strongly advise any of my clients, whether they're buying a single family home, condominium, much more so when they're buying commercial property, to obtain a report from an engineer. It's something that it's fairly inexpensive to get. It's usually very efficient in terms of timing, and you get a detailed report of the status of the property. So if you're buying as is, you need to know everything that may be wrong with the property. And during those 10-15 days in which you can cancel, you're gonna have the leverage to maybe negotiate a credit or a repair or whatever it is that you want to do to address that situation. Contract goes on by establishing what the obligations of the escrow agent and the brokers are. The escrow agent is basically the person, usually it's the attorney for the buyer, at least in Miami-Dade County where we're based. And it's basically the person tasked with holding on to the deposit paid by the buyer, let's say 10% of the purchase price, which is paid when you sign the contract, and then distributing the proceeds, the sale proceeds at closing, which includes the deposit and whatever cash to close the seller needs to bring to the table. There's a section devoted, obviously, to dispute resolution. The deposit is described as liquidated damages for the seller. What is that? And this is a concept that I usually tend to advise my Italian and European clients about. Florida law, in general, US common law doesn't like the enforcement of contractual penalties. You can enforce damages, liquidated damages. In other words, I can agree with my seller on a certain amount that we stipulate will be the damages in case of breach of contract. But I cannot just establish a penalty for breaching the contract, no questions asked. That won't fly. So specifically, the FAR contract indicates that the deposit will be, in case of default by the seller, will be, I apologize, in case of default by the seller, will be returned to the buyer, or conversely, in case of default by the buyer, will be released to the seller. There's a number of boilerplate items. Most important is the obligation to provide marketable title. As I said, the contract is as is, no guarantee. However, there is a threshold that is established under Florida law of the quality of title that the seller needs to convey at closing to the buyer. That standard is marketable title. It's a term of art, something that has been described by our courts as the title that a prudent purchaser would accept acting reasonably. So yes, it doesn't have to be perfect title. There can be some encumbrances, but it needs to be something that within the industry, within the majority of reasonable buyers would be considered acceptable. Another item, and now we're really going to tackle it, is the Ferpta withholding. This is a tax issue that each foreign investor in U.S. real property needs to be aware of. Ferpta withholding is a 15% withholding on the purchase price of U.S. real property that needs to be retained by the buyer when the seller is not a tax resident of the United States. In other words, the IRS, which is the local Agenzia delle Entrate, the IRS tasks buyers of U.S. real property with verifying whether their seller is a non-U.S. tax resident. If they're not, they're going to have to discount 15% from the purchase price and retain it until the seller has filed their tax return and basically paid whatever tax obligations they had. The purpose of this is making sure that, an Italian buyer or a Spanish buyer would just sell real estate property in the United States, realize a significant gain, and then never really care to file a tax return in the US to pay tax on that gain. So they're shifting the burden of the enforcement on the buyer of US real property. Extremely important. There are ways, and we'll talk about it in the next slide, there are ways to address it, but it's something that definitely a buyer, an investor needs to be aware of. Few words on title insurance. I would call this a substitute for what a civil law notary does. So the guarantee, that certainty that you get by a civil law notary and notaio to check in the public records, to check in the real estate records, and ensuring that there are no issues with title to the property. There's no mortgage that nobody has ever mentioned. That function, because we do not have in the United States civil law notaries, not in the same way that they have them in civil law jurisdictions. That function is that purpose is served by title insurance. So title insurance, very large companies, all they do is examining title on a property. They provide what's called a TSR. It's a title search report that the person issuing title, the title agent, who works in part for the underwriter, although it's an independent party, will receive the report, will examine the report, will provide objections to the report. So it will tell, for example, seller, it will inform him, look, we found the mortgage, you have to pay it off at closing. That's an extreme case. You usually know when there's a mortgage. But once everything that needs to be taken care of is taken care of, at closing, the policy will be finally issued. It's going to contain some standard exceptions. You don't want to have non-standard exceptions to the title insurance policy. Little bit of glossary. Usually the title agent, the escrow agent, the closing agent, they're usually the same person. Most of the times you see the buyer's attorney basically wearing different hats. So insuring title, serving as the escrow agent, and then managing closing. So doing all of the disbursement, as I mentioned before, to all of the parties involved in the transaction. So now we're reaching the final line of our real estate transaction. We're getting to closing. Closing is what you would expect in a real estate transaction in Italy. Is the moment when one party disburses the funds and the other conveys title. So there is that exchange, right, that happens. We verified everything, and now we're ready to go. There is that closing agent, as I said, will also be the person ensuring title most of the times. It's also the person holding on to the funds that are in escrow. He will take care of disbursement. He or she will take care of all of these tasks related to closing. There's one item that is, I think, very, very interesting that I want to mention to you. We no longer require physical presence for closing in the state of Florida, and I would say in most of the United States. Even before the pandemic, there were a number of statutes that were enacted to allow for remote online notarization. So the possibility to authenticate a legal act, a legal document, in the presence of a public notary. A public notary in the United States is not your civil law notary. It's just a person who guarantees the authentication. All it does is authenticating signatures, making sure that whoever's signing the document is the person that he says it is. So he will, public notary will just check his document, verify that he signed in front of him, he or she signed in front of him the document. This procedure can now be done online in front of a webcam. There is some variations from state to state as to how that can happen. We have been successfully using a Virginia-based remote online notary service. And I would say throughout the pandemic, that's been key to basically allow for the real estate industry to continue working, to continue functioning. And it's become widely accepted. So my perception is that will be the future. All real estate transactions will, in the future, be handled remotely without the requirement for physical presence. In our case, my firm has a significant clientele in Venezuela, and the embassy of the United States is currently closed. So that's become key to our practice. I'm gonna accelerate a little bit because I feel like I'm probably running out of time. You want to make sure you're planning for probate succession. Who's gonna inherit the property, the U.S. property, in case your investor is an individual? You want to make sure you are adequately planning for that. You want, to the extent possible, avoid the judicial succession procedure. You want to avoid getting the courts involved. The process tends to be very long and very expensive. There are ways to do it, and it's really important to make those considerations before even signing a real estate contract. The other big part to this is the tax considerations. I mentioned Ferpta. Ferpta is an income tax issue. There's also something that particularly individuals who are non-US residents need to be aware of, and that is the estate tax. It's a trap for the unwary. If you don't know about it, if you just follow along whatever opportunity is presented to you without thinking about this, you can get your heirs in potentially a very disappointing situation the moment they need to inherit the property. The United States only allows a $60,000 exemption from the estate tax for non-US domiciliaries. With planning, this can be basically avoided. Just important to mention, there is an estate tax treaty between Italy and the United States, but it's not a substitute for planning. You don't really want to rely solely on the treaty. And there's an alert that I included there. The Biden administration is already thinking about a significant reduction of the exemption, even for US domiciliaries. They currently are at 11.7 million, which can be doubled for a couple. It's going to come down significantly, apparently 3.5 million. I just included here, and I'm not going to get into too much detail, two examples of structures that can serve the purpose of an Italian investor of US real property. They're not the only structures possible. I just think that they were interesting to include here because they provide what to me is a bit of the gold standard. They provide advantages. They allow to tackle the probate considerations I mentioned before, and they take care of the estate tax. They also take care of Ferpta, these two structures that I included here. And one of them is for, they look very much alike. One of them is for Mario Rossi, your typical Italian investor of US real estate, and an Italian company which is investing in US real estate for income production. I summarized here the considerations. I'm not, I feel like I'm running out of time, so I don't want to keep spending much more time. This is a summary of the things we talked about. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And I'm going to thank you so much for your attention. And Cristina, please take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fabio. Now I would like to give the floor to Luca Bagnasco. Luca is enrolled in the Bar of Rome and for more than 10 years experience. Is a PhD at Lewis University and even is part of the International Committee of the Rome Bar and promoter of the agreement with the Florida Bar. Thank you, Luca. I will speak about opportunities and critical aspects in international operations.
Thank you, Cristina. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Let me thank in particular President Galletti for the wonderful words on my person, and let me say that wouldn't be possible to reach that result without the cooperation and the role of the Rome Bar Board and the great help of the Florida Bar. So let me thanks and congratulate with everybody. You are too many, so I can't congratulate and thanks one by one. Good morning again. Good morning to the American colleagues and good afternoon to the Italian colleagues. As you already heard, today I'll offer you more an overview of the Italian real estate transaction system archetype with some particular concern on international transaction and in particular when some of the parties is a foreigner. But before to get on the main subject, let me say something about this cooperation. In particular, if you are interested to join the project between the bars, please feel free to contact us directly or to write directly to the bars. Now, real estate market. Why we choose to debating this argument? Well, first because it's on our competence. Second, because as you probably will agree, nowadays, we are witnessing an increasing of international real estate transaction. Why? It's due to several factors, as for example, a more affordable travel cost, an easier access to information through internet, a spreading of international communities among the cities. For example, Miami have a every year grower Italian community, but even Italian cities like Milan, Rome, and Naples have a quite significant North American community. Last of all, that this year was decisive with the coronavirus, that outbreaks, the smart working, that outbreaks after the coronavirus. Well, buying a property abroad can be even a good investment, but the property market regulation can be completely different from what you may be familiar with. As Fabio said before, the Florida market regulation is completely different from the Italian one. Even lawyer with a key competence on real estate market can find it confusing if they don't come directly from the country target. So we thought and we think that have an overview on the real estate transaction in the frame of international comparative studies could be interesting for lawyer of both bar. Say these things, let me advise you in advance that our conference won't be completely exhaustive on the argument. In fact, we won't have enough time to analyze all the aspects involved in an international real estate transaction. And I particularly refer to the fiscal and informational charge that are different from each country and in most of the cases are based on buyer nationality regulation. So from that comes my first advice on international real estate transaction. It will be always better to work at least with two lawyers, one from the country residence of the buyer, possibly with an international fiscal competence, and the other one from the country target, the target where is the property, possibly with a key competence on real estate and international transaction. Honestly, in our experience, some problematic keyballs can be faced significantly better with a joint approach instead of only one. Moreover, as in many other cases, invest in prevention means avoid unpredictable troubles that in this sector can be particularly expensive. Now, going on the Italian real estate regulation, I will say now probably something that is assumed for the Italian audience, but is essential in order to analyze the difference of regulation between the countries. On this purpose, I'm going to point out what is primary in the Italian real estate transaction system archetype. The key feature of Italian real estate system archetype compared to the Florida one is the rule of the notary. What is a notary? A notary is a third person in a position of independence with respect to the seller and the buyer, and at the same time a public official requested by law in any real estate transaction. He has the duty to ensure that the purchase takes place in compliance with all the legal regulation. So he fulfills in one hand a public function, and in the other hand a prevention function for both parties and in particular for the buyer. In fact, he has the duty to check the legitimacy of the property's title before its transfer, also verifying that the property is not subject, for example, to any restriction or to any prejudicial transcription. So now going back to the Florida experience and in general to the Northern American experience in the real estate, in the Italian real estate regulation, there must be always the involvement of a public official to give effect to the transaction. Of course, we are speaking about the transaction that take place in Italy for Italian real estate property. And let me say that this asset, this system archetype and the rule of the notary is even the first systematic warrant. In fact, if you look at the data, the notary control avoid the majority of the frauds. If you look at the data, it's very rare that an Italian real estate transaction ends in a litigation if, of course, the notary formal control is well made. That means even that the most of the real estate transaction litigation involve the notary. This represents a warranty, another warranty for the buyer, because the notary responds of his responsibility by a mandatory insurance. So if he made some mistake, he will respond by his insurance. And this is, of course, a warranty for the buyer. Anyway, we say that civil litigation for real estate transactions are very rare, but however rare, it's better to avoid any litigation. And that's why the control of a lawyer, which acts in the only interest of one of the parties, can be decisive to completely avoid unwanted surprises. Differently from the role of the notary that takes place when the party already have an agreement, at least a preliminary agreement, the rule of the orderly, which, let me be clear, is not obligatory but is strongly recommended, should take place at the beginning of the negotiation. So, in particular, if there is one of the parties a foreigner, it's better to go to a lawyer at the beginning of the negotiation. Now, if in the real estate transaction, in particular when the buyer comes from abroad, the negotiation starts always with a letter of interest. A letter of interest is a non-binding pre-contractual document that is usually signed by both parties to set out clearly and precisely the term of negotiation for property purchase. It's aimed to avoid any misunderstanding during the negotiation and allow both parties to carry out the due diligence on the estate and on the other party. Now, let me say something more about letter of interest. This letter is sometimes dismissed by Italian lawyers when they don't have a specific competence on real estate. And that, on my opinion, is a mistake if you consider that Italian law provides pre-contractual liability. That means that if the seller is having an unfair behavior, you can charge him for the expensive. And on this purpose, the letter of interest can be decisive in a possible responsibility judgment. Second, after the letter is signed, it's vital to acquire and review all the documents in order to conduct a survey of the property. This to verify the status of the estate and to correctly organize all the steps to the deal. The due diligence is vital, first, because most of the times avoid unexpected problems before it's too late. Second, because at this early stage, the buyer hasn't already signed any vinculant document or paid any deposit. So he is in a much stronger position with the seller. The time required to collect and verify all the documents and set up the transfer steps can be very different in relation of the type of the deal. In fact, if the negotiation concerns an off-market property or a property that difficult to find buyers, for example, due to the price, the type of the estate, the location, etc., in our experience, there will be enough time to completely accomplish the due diligence before any kind of deposit. Differently, if the property is on the market and is very requested because of its features, the buyer can decide to quickly make an offer of purchase that binds the deal for a period of time. With the offer of purchase, the buyer has to pay a deposit to the seller. This provision is directly regulated by the Italian Civil Code under the name caparra confirmatoria, and is generally a very little amount compared to the price of the deal. And moreover, the price can be arranged by the parties. The offer of purchase has to respect the formal provision of the Italian law. Otherwise, if it's not correctly formulated, wouldn't produce the binding effect and can be considered as a prepayment of the whole deal without the binding effects. Moreover, and pay attention because this is vital for understanding of the choices of the parties at this stage, the offer of purchase can establish to directly become a preliminary contract once one is accepted by the seller, or always when it's accepted by the seller can force the parties to make and sign a new preliminary agreement. On my point of view, this clarification is important because if you look at the vast majority of the theoric articles on the argument, they just speak about the automatic conversion from offer to purchase to preliminary agreement when the offer is accepted by the seller. While in the practice, it's much more common the obligation to make a new preliminary agreement. And this for many reasons. The first, because in this case, the deposit made with the offer of purchase can be significantly lower. And second, but even more important, because the preliminary contract is a complex legal document which should be deeply evaluated and regulated in details. Anyway, once it's signed by both parties, the preliminary contract has a double effect. In one hand, it's a warranty for the seller, because if the deal doesn't take place because of buyer reconsideration of the deal, the seller can hold the deposit and so by it be refunded in some way for the time lost in the negotiation. In the other hand, when it's accepted by the seller, he binds the deal and offer a warranty even to the buyer, because if the deal doesn't take place for a seller reconsideration of the offer, it will be him, the seller, to give back to the buyer the double of the deposit. Instead, if the deal takes place without any trouble, the deposit will be considered on law provision as a prepayment of the whole deal. So it's not just a price to stop and to bind the deal. Now, going back to the diligence, as you can imagine, a quickly offer of purchase could not match well with a preliminary exhaustive due diligence. So in this case, the survey may and should go on after the offer. As you probably understood, in my opinion, it's better to make a new preliminary agreement once the offer is expected, in particular if the offer takes place at an early stage of the due diligence. So there will be enough time to find out any troubles with the deal and without risk to lose a significant amount. Moreover, there is something else to clarify about this deposit. In fact, if the reconsideration of the deal depends on a legal justification emerged by the due diligence, as for example, if the state is different from what was agreed for as an example, urban planning discrepancy not declared by the seller, in this case, the buyer will be free not only to withdraw by the deal, but even to request the return of the double of the deposit to the seller. This to point out how much a well-made due diligence is important. When both parties have signed the preliminary contract and due diligence is complete, comes the time of the final purchase. By the final purchase and the sign of the deed of sale in front of the notary. The deed can be signed by both parties by a legal representative for each party. According to the Italian practice, the notary is chosen by the buyer, although it's completely neutral. This is because the payment of the notary is on the buyer and there is not a fixed price for the notary service. So the notary is a public official, but at the same time can be chosen by the buyer or the seller, but in the practice, for this reason, is chosen by the seller, by the buyer. So the notary have a lot of duty, as we already said before, and have to do all the compliance to fulfill that the transaction take place in respect of all the legal regulation. And when there is the day of the contract and he will read the final contract in front of the parties in order to avoid any misunderstanding of the legal terms. After, the contract will be signed by both parties and the buyer has to pay the purchase price to the seller. He can buy it by a bank check, cashier check, or a bank deposit, even get by a mortgage. Usually, once the deed of sales are signed, take place the property handover through the formal exchange of the keys of the property. But they can manage it and they can choose another way to the property handover. Anyway, after the payment and after the property handover, the notary proceeds to his final duties and the registration of deed with the revenue agency and the deposit of the deed in the public register as well. Take note that the filing of the deed in the competent real estate registry is required by law to allow anyone to know who is the owner of a property. so you can know who is our owner of our property directly by the public register of real estate. So in conclusion, this is the basic scheme of real estate transaction system archetype. There will be, of course, many other things to say about, for example, the anti-money laundering that take place in Italy, the commission to the real estate agents, and in particular the tax regime, the tax benefits, as for example, the one on the first house, the tax credit, the exemption for taxes, the tax breaks as the cedolare secca for residential estate. But as we said at the beginning of my speech, we haven't enough time to analyze everything. And I don't want to steal more time to my colleagues. So I pass my word to my colleague Filippo Maria Cohen that will deeply elaborate on the warranties on the international real estate transaction. To end my speech, let me thank again Ron Bar, the Florida Bar, and the audience, clarifying that I stay at disposal of everybody want to study in deep this argument or to work with the collaboration between the bars, with the project between the bars. Thank you, everybody, again.
Thank you very much, Luca. And the next speaker is Filippo Maria Cohen. After several years working for Italian and international law firms, he's now located in Rome. He works in the real estate investment department, where he assists clients with regard to both real estate and M&A transaction. He will speak about legal and conventional guarantees in real estate cross-border operation. Thank you, Filippo.
Thank you, Cristina. First of all, I would like to thank everyone for this invitation. During my brief speech, I will focus my attention on the legal and market standards contractual guarantees in the context of the real estate transaction in Italy. The real estate transactions in Italy, as in the other countries, find one of the most delicate aspects in verifying the legal issues and in adopting suitable guarantees with regard to all parts of the transaction. These transactions are protected by a system of guarantees that range from the legal ones provided by the Civil Code and processed by Italian case law to the contractual ones created and developed by the best real estate practice. This real estate practice also has the merit of making it possible to introduce mainly Anglo-Saxon legal institution in Italy. The aim of the contractual guarantees is to provide legal protection with regard to specific risks connected to the real estate analysis as carried out by the buyer during the due diligence. Furthermore, this function of contractual guarantees represents a way to seal the loopholes that still exist in our legislation. In fact, the legal guarantees alone are not always capable of fulfilling the requirements of the parties, especially when dealing with real estate sales and purchases of great value and complexity. In order to better understand this need, it is of fundamental importance to analyze the main legal guarantees as provided by the Civil Code. The first one is the mandatory law provision concerning the eviction guarantee pursuant to Article 1483 of the Civil Code, that expressly covered the risk for a buyer in connection with the existence of defects in the seller's title to property. The eviction occurs where a third party claims a right over the property against the right of the buyer, and as a result, the buyer loses ownership of such property. According to the provisions of Italian Civil Code, the seller must guarantee the buyer and hold him harmless from any damages deriving from the eviction. Coming back to Fabio's presentation, in light of the existence of this mandatory law provision, in Italy, for example, it is not market practice to have an insurance policy covering the risk of eviction, which by itself does not represent an insurable risk for the purposes of Italian insurance law. The second one is Article 1482 concerning the legal defects limiting ownership. that states that in the case in which the real estate property to be transferred is burdened by encumbrances or by other liens, the promissory buyer is entitled to suspend the payment of purchase price until the property is free from any encumbrances. If the promissory buyer is still interested in the real estate property, he can ask for a price reduction, instigating specific legal action known as actio quanti minoris. If the seller demonstrates that the buyer knew that the asset was burdened by legal defects, or the party have included in the contract a clause stating that the sale is at his own risk, the seller will be relieved from all responsibility. The third one is the Article 1489 concerning legal defects limiting enjoyment of the real estate property. Provides for the same legal protection pursuant to Article 1482 in case the real estate asset is burdened by encumbrances or rights in rem or personal rights which were not visible nor declared in the contract but which limit enjoyment of the property. This regulation also included town planning, historical or landscape burden. The seller will be free from any responsibility only if he has declared in the contract the presence of a restriction in enjoyment of the property. On the other hand, if the seller has declared the absence of all encumbrances, the buyer will be implicitly exonerated from any further investigation. With regard to the material defects, if the real estate property at stake has hidden or not easily recognizable material defects, which make the property unsuitable to its use or decreases considerably its value, the buyer has the right to terminate the contract and ask for damages or claim for a price reduction. The buyer shall report to the seller any discovered defects within 8 days from the discovery and instigate legal action within the legal prescription term of 1 year from the handover of the property. These brief terms, 8 days and 1 year, are not applicable in case of alius pro alio, which means that the delivered items is of a completely different kind from the one promised. Furthermore, if the buyer has an effective knowledge of the material defects, or if these are easily recognizable, the seller will be discharged from all liabilities. So from my brief analysis, it could seem that the Civil Code provides for wide and adequate protection in favor of the buyer. Nevertheless, as I previously mentioned, there are several reasons that push the parties to provide contractual guarantees regarding the sale and purchase agreements that are additional, sometimes derogative, and alternative to the legal guarantees pursuant to the Italian Civil Code. I can summarize it into 4 different factors. First of all, the growing complexity and variety of the risk of real estate transaction imposes on the parties the need for negotiation contractual clauses concerning specific aspects on the basis of an adequate due diligence. Secondly, the restrictive terms of decadence and prescription, 8 days and 1 year, that the buyer shall respect, make the legal guarantees inadequate to offer reassuring protection to real estate investors. Indeed, the terms do not seem appropriate in a complex market such as today's, in which large real estate investors acquire, for example, portfolio of dozens of property also located in different cities, often with high-tech system. In such cases, the 8 days deadline for asserting a defect is clearly difficult to respect. Moreover, the requirement of knowability under Civil Code is an element of subjective discretion and interpretative uncertainty in determining whether the consequences of these defects are within the seller's responsibility because the defect was hidden, or are within the buyer's responsibility because the defect was known or knowable, despite the due diligence usually carried out by the buyer. Last but not least, in the cross-border transaction, foreign operators prefer a set of autonomous contractual guarantees governed by a single contract text, which they can know and negotiate, rather than protection applicable by reference to a code that they hardly know. For these reasons, the real estate contractual practice developed several clauses to protect the parties. The main ones are the set of representation and warranties, in accordance to which the seller guarantees, for example, the regularity of the property and the absence of defects concerning specific real estate areas. The seller will be held responsible for any violation concerning the representation and warranties, or disclosure of the existing defects made by the seller that will be treated as an exception to the representation and warranties, or the time limits of the contractual guarantees that are usually between 12 and 36 months. The length of these terms depend on various factors. The main ones are the need of the parties and the different characteristics of the real estate asset and the nature of the specific risk. And cap, basket, and de minimis in order to regulate the indemnities obligation of the seller in case of violation of the contractual guarantees. Therefore, unlike the civil code provisions in which the seller is held responsible for all defects, including the hidden ones, the party can decide to regulate by means of a contractual clause the liability of the seller, stating that he will be only held responsible for the areas expressly guaranteed by him. On the other hand, the buyer will be only liable for the disclosed defects. In this way, the gray area between known and unknown can be erased. In this framework, it's also interesting to mention the function carried out by the deed of transfer, as mentioned before by Luca. With regard to the formality of the sale and purchase of the real estate property, indeed, the agreement concerning the sale and purchase of the ownership of a real estate property has to be made in written form, as the law imposes, and after its execution, the agreement becomes binding between the parties. In addition to it, in order to become effective vis-à-vis third parties, the deed of transfer must be registered, generally as buyer's cost, with the relevant land register in Italy. It also consists in practice, similar to the M&A one, to sign by means of exchange of correspondence a contract which has the aim to govern the relationship between the parties, including and especially the contractual guarantees. Afterward, this contract shall be followed by the preliminary deed of transfer or directly by the definitive deed of transfer, both in short form and aimed to comply with the formal registration requirement. In both cases, this contract will provide for a clause that expressly states that such notarized agreements will not supersede different ones between the parties. In this way, the parties will be saved the effects of the agreement signed by means of exchange of correspondence, which includes all the contractual guarantees aforementioned. I now leave the chair to the next colleague.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Filippo Maria. I'd like to give the floor now to Jacqueline Villalba. Jacqueline is a specialist in immigration and nationality law. She has extensive experience in areas of business, family-based immigration. She represents clients before U.S. citizenship and immigration services with regard to non-immigrant visa petition, extraordinary ability, national interest waiver, and application for naturalization. She will speak about the legislation of immigration in real estate operation in Florida. Thank you, Jacqueline.
No, thank you. And hello to everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here with my colleagues today. And as it was indicated, we're going to discuss a little bit about the benefits of immigration law and how real estate transactions can translate and provide U.S. immigration benefits to foreign nationals. Many individuals may think that just owning property in the US would be sufficient and would be a cause for someone to be able to live here, possibly work here in the United States. But unfortunately, just owning US real estate or property here in the US is not sufficient to trigger or generate the benefit of a visa. A foreign national, Italian national, can come to the United States to visit their property, to vacation in their vacation home under the ESTA program. A visa is not required. However, if the foreign citizen wants to go beyond that, wants to stay for an extended period of time, as you may know, ESTA, you are only allowed to visit for up to 90 days. Each entry, but every entry is limited to a 90-day maximum period. So for an individual who wants to spend more time in the United States, possibly work here, maybe develop or oversee that property or develop it to then maybe possibly sell it in the future, maybe it is an investment property. Those types of activities would require authorization from the US government. It would require a specific visa. Because under ESTA, a person is just allowed to come in to visit, and the visit can be for business purposes, but it's very limited, the activities, the business activities that can be conducted under the ESTA program. So today we're going to talk about vehicles that an investment in real estate how it can be used to obtain a visa. So it's important to start with the concept of non-immigrant and immigrant visas. It's two different types of visas, non-immigrant being temporary or short-term, and immigrant meaning permanent, or you may have heard the term green card, residency, formal residency in the United States. For the non-immigrant visa or temporary visa, the appropriate visa would be an E2 investor visa, where an Italian citizen could invest in property here in the United States, making an investment, purchasing property, and use that to obtain an E2 visa. Now, it cannot be a passive investment. Merely purchasing a home or a condominium or even a commercial property in and of itself is not sufficient. That is considered passive investment for purposes of the E2 visa. For the E2 visa, it is required that the investment be active. So the question is, how can we make sure that the investment is considered active? So, like I said, just purchasing real estate here is not sufficient. But if you purchase enough real estate, for example, 3, 4, maybe 5 different properties, and you establish a company here in the US that is going to provide property management services to those properties or to those homes or those condominiums, the property management company can serve as a vehicle to obtain an E2 visa. Interestingly, in the US, for the E2 visa, there is no minimum amount of investment. There's no required amount in order to be able to opt for the E2 visa, as long as the investment is considered substantial. And what does substantial mean? It's relative to the amount of funds needed to develop that operation or that business and make sure that the business is able to succeed and to develop itself. So if the investment to get the business going is going to be, for example, 100,000, we're going to want to see that you've invested close to 80 or 90% of the amount of funds needed to develop that business. Again, there is no set percentage or set minimum. That's in my personal experience and my counseling of clients, because the consulates, when they are reviewing the foreign investors visa application, they want to see that the investor is committed and that they are serious about developing the business here. So you want to be able to show that you have or that the foreign national has made a substantial investment, a substantial commitment to develop that business here. The other requirement is that the type of business cannot be considered marginal. And what does that mean under the regulations? It means that the business cannot be so small or limited that it would only generate a minimal living for the investor and his family. It has to be the type of business that can develop and have operations to support more than the investor, more than him or her and his or her family. How do we demonstrate this? If this is the type of business that could generate employment for maybe 2 or 3 US workers beyond the investor and his family, then that would meet the definition, and the investment in that case would not be considered marginal. So you want to look at that when looking at the type of investment here. In the example of real estate, purchasing the 3 or 4, depending however many real estate properties the investor wants to purchase, but developing the business that's going to manage those properties. That business would have the possibility of generating employment for US workers in the sense of a property manager, maybe individuals who would be responsible for the maintenance, maybe responsible for landscaping, maybe individuals who would be responsible for actual electrical or plumbing work, things like that. The day-to-day individuals who would be responsible for carrying out the day-to-day maintenance or management of the properties in which the investor has invested. So that would meet that definition of not considered marginal because it would generate employment for additional individuals. The other requirement for the E2 visa is, although it is a visa that would allow the individual to live here, work here, travel in and out, the investor has to have the intent to return to Italy. At the end of their project, they are going to be here developing and directing the operations of their investment. And once the investment is up and running and it's functioning, the intent is always to return back home. The individual cannot have the intent to remain here permanently, at least for purposes of this visa. It's possible that maybe in the future the intent changes and they look to opt to maybe a possible route to green card or residency. But for the E2 visa, one of the requirements is the intent to return home. Now, that being said, the E2 visa, there is no maximum amount of time an individual can have an E2 visa. It is renewable indefinitely as long as the investment continues. Initially, based on the treaty and the visa reciprocity between the United States and Italy, the visa can be issued for up to 5 years, and again, can be renewed in increments of up to 5 years as long as the investment continues. Another point, when the investor enters the US with an E2 visa, they are allotted a time period of up to 2 years. So a foreign investor, Italian citizen on an E2 visa, can enter the US and remain in the United States for up to 2 years without departing. They are allowed to come in and out. It's very flexible, the visa. There is no requirement that they stay the entire 2-year period. If they want to stay 2 days or 20 days or 20 weeks or the entire 2-year period, they can. It is very flexible. Another benefit is that spouses of E2 visa holders are eligible for dependent visa status, and with that dependent visa status are eligible for a general work permit here in the United States. So not only does the investor get to work or have the authorization to work in the United States, developing and directing the operations of their investment vehicle, but the spouse also has the opportunity to work if they wish to do so. Interestingly, the spouse would be granted a general work permit, allowing them to work in any company on their own, self-employed, or through any employer here in the US. Unfortunately, the investor, however, is strictly tied to only providing services for his or her investment. So there is a small distinction there. And strategically, when we have a couple that both citizens have a qualifying treaty nationality, we look and see who wants to make the investment here in the United States. And then we also look at who has additional possibilities for employment outside of the investment. And then we may make one person, we may make the individual who has more opportunities outside of the investment as the dependent, so that they would be eligible for the general work permit. There's different ways to structure the E2 visa application to try to achieve the goals of both parties in the family. Also important to note, spouses are not required to have the qualifying treaty nationality. So you may have a binational couple where one person has the qualifying Italian nationality in this case, and the other does not. Well, they are still allowed and benefit from dependent visa status. They would not be eligible to be a primary E2 visa holder or a principal investor or principal E2 visa holder. However, they can be a dependent. Also, children under the age of 21 are included as dependents on their parents' applications. Children can study in the United States. They can go to public school or private school. There are no restrictions, can travel in and out, but children, even 18, 19, they are not eligible for employment authorization. So there is that restriction on the children dependent category. The E2 visa is available based on the Treaty of Commerce and Navigation between the United States and Italy. It is specific, this visa category, the E2 visa category, is specific for treaty nationals. And it is based on a treaty. There's several different countries with who the US has the treaty, but unless the treaty exists, this category is not available. This visa, again, up to 5 years and can be renewed indefinitely. So although it is not a green card or a permanent status, depending on how the investment is structured and the business plan of the investment or the operation here, a person could continue renewing for many, many years, although they are not considered a green card holder or a resident in the United States. They may not want to become a resident in the United States, and that is okay. This would be a vehicle that they would be able to come in and out of the United States, live here, work here, have the family join them and live here with them while they are temporarily directing the operations of the investment. So it is a very good vehicle, a very good option through which we can tie and use investment in real estate to obtain a visa. But again, just investing, just purchasing a vacation home is not sufficient. It will not lead to the E2 visa. Another option for based on real estate investment would be a permanent solution or immigrant visa through the EB5 visa category. The EB5 visa category, it's permanent or a green card status for individuals who invest between either $900,000 or $1.8 million in some type of project here in the United States, and it can include real estate investment. The difference between EB5 and E2, the option that we just discussed, E2 temporary or non-immigrant, EB5 permanent or immigrant. That's the very first distinction. The second distinction I mentioned, E2 visas do not require a minimum amount of investment. In contrast, EB5 does require a minimum amount of investment. You are either investing $900,000 or $1.8 million. And the difference between the amounts or the requirements in the dollar amount in the investment is where the funds are invested. If the funds are invested in what is considered a targeted employment area, then the investment qualifies under the smaller amount. If it is not considered a targeted employment area, then the investor is required to invest the higher 1.8 million. In the E2 category, another distinction, E2 category does not require a minimum number of employees. We have the concept of marginality, where we have to show that the operation or the business can generate employment for U.S. workers, but there is not a minimum number that must be required. My recommendation, 2 or 3. One, based on how the regulations is written, should theoretically qualify, but the more positions it creates, the stronger the investment is, and at time of renewal, it will be demonstrated, and we would be able to demonstrate what the company really has done here, and that will assist in terms of getting the visa renewed. The EB5 program does require for the investment to generate employment for a minimum of 10 US workers. So that's another distinction between the two options. Continuing on in distinctions, the E2 visa is can be obtained in a relatively quick period of time. It does require the investor to invest funds and develop the business to the point that it is either already operating or almost ready to operate, so that the only thing that is required is the investor traveling to the US and is basically opening the business doors. The EB5 does have to develop itself, but it has a longer period of time to do so. But in order to obtain the immigrant visa, the processing time right now is anywhere between 2.5 to 3 years. And opting or investing and pursuing the immigrant visa classification does not give the investor benefit of living here or working here while USCIS is considering the application. In the E2 temporary context, once the investor develops, invests the funds and starts up that business, we take all of that information, we prepare a complete visa application and present it to the US consulate in Rome. The US consulate in Rome will review the application packet and then schedule the investor for an interview, during which they will ask the investor a series of questions related to their investment. If the consular officer is satisfied that the investment meets the criteria, that it is substantial, that it is not marginal, that the individual will be returning to Italy at the conclusion of the temporary stay, then they would proceed to approve the visa. Pre-COVID, in our pre-pandemic times, the average processing times once the application packet was delivered to the US consulate in Rome, it would take anywhere between 12 and 14 weeks for the consulate team to review it and schedule the individual for interview. Now, due to the pandemic, consular operations worldwide are significantly limited, and we are seeing increasing delays with regard to scheduling these types of interviews and having these cases reviewed. Additionally, we are temporarily subject to the presidential proclamations barring entry of individuals from certain countries due to the pandemic. So individuals who have been in or who are present or have been within 14 days prior to their entry in one of the Schengen countries, in the UK, in Brazil, South Africa was recently added, China as well, Iran, any of these countries that are subject to the presidential proclamation, the individuals are temporarily barred from entering. So right now, although we can pursue E2 visa applications and they are still being processed, there is additional delays because of the pandemic. And although we can request national interest exceptions to the proclamation, so there are exceptions to not being able to come in, they are very limited in scope. In fact, just about 3.5 weeks ago, the criteria originally noted in January of this year was rescinded, and a much more restricted criteria was in place, essentially where we have to be able to demonstrate that the individual will be making an impact or have some type of work in what is known as or what is deemed critical infrastructure. So if we can demonstrate that this investment is related to critical infrastructure, and there's a list of designated sectors or industries which have been listed under critical infrastructure, then we can make that argument and request a national interest exception. But despite the pandemic and despite the other challenges we're seeing in other visa categories, it still remains, the E2 still remains a very quick option, as just not as quick as we had prior to the pandemic. But those are some of the distinctions between the two, the E2 and then the EB5 category. Again, EB5 being permanent and E2 being temporary for the individual. At the end of the day, we need to look at the clients, the investors' goals, both on a short-term and a long-term basis. And based on what those goals are, we can advise them how a real estate transaction can assist in being able to live here, work here, be it temporarily or on a more permanent basis. But there is possibilities of using real estate transactions in the US to obtain US immigration benefits for an investor and his or her family. With that, if you guys have any questions, any of the, anyone in the audience, any of the colleagues, we are definitely happy to answer them for you. Again, I thank you. I'm glad that we were able to participate, and I look forward to continued collaboration between the International Law Section and the Rome Bar Association, and hopefully we will have many more webinars like this one today. So back to, I guess, Christina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. We still have some minutes left. I don't know if the speakers want to add something to their speaking. I don't know, or maybe some conclusions about. I see there is Robert Becerra. Maybe. Would you like to say some words just to conclude this event?
All I can say is that this has been a fabulous first of a web series between our two organizations. I've been very pleased, having listened to the whole program, that I believe that we are well on our way to effectuating the purposes of our collaboration agreement between our two bar associations. I found the subject matter extremely interesting, and all I can say is I look forward very much to the next in the series of webinars that our organizations will put on together, and look forward in the future to much more collaboration as well.
Thank you very much. I'm sure about this, and I would like to thank you again, the President, all the speakers for their very interesting conference. Some colleagues are asking if the registration of this webinar will be available. Yes, it will be available soon on the YouTube channel of the Bar Association of Rome. This is also for all the colleagues from the Florida Bar Association, if they want to see again or just to spread this webinar. I'm sure that many other opportunities there will be to deep dive our legal systems, and the cooperation between our holders, of course, will intensify more and more. I would like to thank you for your attention and wish you a good morning and a good afternoon. Thank you very much, and
Bye.
see you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.